Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well on this beginning of the new week. We're in Sefer Vayikra, Parshas Vayikra. We're going to do a Rashi from the second Aliyah today. Vayikra, of course, introduces us to the whole concept of Korbanos. We just dedicated the Mishkan, the end of the construction of the Mishkan, and the end of Sefer Shmos, Pekudei. Now we go to Vayikra, how to use the Mishkan, what to use it for, what sacrifices are brought. And so our parsha delineates all of the major sacrifices and goes from the Korban Ola, the elevation offering, which is brought for any number of reasons, including in a public fashion every single day on behalf of the entire Jewish people. Then we go to the Korban Mincha, what we know as the flour offerings. Then the Korban Shlamim, it's known as the peace offerings, Korban Chata, sin offerings, and of course various types of sin offerings, individual sin offerings, the sin offering of the Nasi, of the Kohen Mashiach, of the Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, when the entire Beis Din, entire society makes a halachic mistake, all kinds of variations of the Korban Chatas. Then we have the Korban Asham, the guilt offering, and Asham Taloi, various different variations on that. So we'll get to some of these as we go on in the Parsha and start to understand a little bit about what all of these are for and what they're brought for and how they're brought and some of the differences that arise between them. But today we'll focus on one from our Aliyah. It's a very short Rashi. I don't have so much to say about it, but a very important one. So right after the Korban Ola is mentioned, and various kinds of Korban Ola are mentioned. Korban Ola can be sometimes brought from a bull, sometimes sheep and goats, sometimes from birds, fowl. So those are brought by different levels of people who want to bring different kinds of animals. But then we get into the Korban Mincha, and the introduction of the Korban Mincha very famously says, "V'nefesh ki sakriv Korban Mincha l'Hashem, so l'siyah Korbano, v'yatzaka le'Hashem, v'nasan alea levona." It talks about the ingredients in the Korban Mincha, the flour offering, the meal offering. It has to be fine flour, and it has to have oil, and it has to have frankincense, levona, but it's a very simple offering. Rashi says we have to focus not only on the simplicity of the offering, but on who is bringing that. Torah introduces it with the word v'nefesh, nefesh ki sakriv. Lo nemar nefesh b'chol ha-korbanos dava el b'mincha. Nefesh is not mentioned by all these korbanos nedava, the volunteer offerings, the ola, the shlamim. The word nefesh is not mentioned, and yet it's mentioned over here in specific. Why? Mi darko lehisnadev mincha ani amar kadosh baruch hu ma'ale ani alav ki hikriv nafsho. Because who's bringing this mincha offering? Of all the voluntary offerings, if someone had more means, they would probably bring a korban shlamim. It's a nicer offering, a bigger offering. They get to partake of the meat. Someone would bring a meal offering, a flour offering, only if they were very poor, if they couldn't afford the other voluntary offerings. And because of that, the Torah says nefesh, in order to inculcate within us how important this small, meager, cheap type of offering is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when it's an ani, a poor person that brings it. When a poor person goes out of the way to give of themselves, even in the tiniest of way, even a meal offering, which is so insignificant, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu means the world. It's as if they brought their own nefesh, their own soul, onto the Mizbeach, sacrifice it before God. It's that important to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's true of any korban. Of course, we hope that a person brings a korban, not just in terms of its monetary value, but imagines himself being brought on the Mizbeach. They bring in their nefesh, they're bringing their neshama, they're bringing their soul. But that has to happen only when you bring it in the most sincere fashion, you bring it in the most appropriate fashion. The Torah is highlighting that specifically by the Korban Mincha because it's something very difficult for an ani to do. An ani, a poor person, can't always give anything at all. And the fact that they stretch themselves to bring even this could feel very embarrassing to them. It could feel very downgrading to them. It could believe in their eyes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't really care because they're not bringing something of great significance. But the Torah warns them and reinforces to them and reminds them that even the most insignificant of gifts is of utmost significance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu if it's brought with sincerity. If the poor person brings even the meal offering with sincerity, then that's like the greatest korban on earth for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I think it's a model for all of us to think about in terms of what we receive from others, not just gifts, but what people do to us, what people say to us, all kinds of interactions that we have from big to small. We have to think about them not only in terms of their size and their proportion and their value, but in terms of the sincerity of the person bringing it. Sometimes the smallest gesture from another person brought with incredible sincerity can be much more meaningful than the more expensive gift brought to you by someone of great means, but not with the greatest of sincerity. So it's a model for us to think about in terms of our own behaviors, in terms of our own understanding of our relationships, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu understand his relationship to the poor person bringing it. I will point out that as Rashi mentions, nefesh is mentioned elsewhere. It's not the only place over here. When you come later in the parsha to the Korban Chatas, for example, nefesh is mentioned over there. The Mefarshim explain when a person makes a mistake, they really have to atone for their nefesh, which was the driver of this sin and the one responsible for the sin, the one that bears the imprint of the sin, and therefore nefesh is mentioned over there. But that's again an obligatory korban. Rashi is mentioning over here that in terms of the voluntary korbans, when a person just brings out of the goodness of their heart, nefesh is never really mentioned, except in this context of the korban mincha, which would normally be brought by a poor person, which therefore allows us to see that it highlights that sincerity of the poor person in specific, but really only as a model to all other people who bring with sincerity as well. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you too, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good
תודה
day.
רבה, יפה מאוד.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Rabbi.